The dust came up in a red cloud behind her horse, and every person on the main street of Hallow's Bend stopped what they were doing and stared. They knew that horse. A dark roan mare with a notch in her left ear, 15 hands high and lean from hard riding. They had seen that horse 7 years ago, the night the Redd homestead burned to its foundation stones. The night a young woman rode out of Hallow's Bend with nothing but a bedroll, a borrowed rifle, and a fury so cold it had not needed a word. She was back. Calla Redd pulled the roan to a stop in front of the water trough and stepped down from the saddle in one clean movement. She was 30 years old and looked every year of it, not in a way that diminished her, but in a way that said she had spent those years doing something. Her skin was deep brown and road-dusted, her black hair braided back and coming loose at the temples. She wore a dark coat that had survived 3 winters and a man's brass-buckled belt that had belonged to her father. The small scar at her right temple caught the afternoon light. She had not walked 10 feet from the trough when the door of the Prescott Land and Title Office opened. Wade Prescott stepped out onto the boardwalk. He was silver-haired and expensive-looking, his wool coat clean and pressed in the way that announced money in a dusty town. He had the pale blue eyes of a man who had spent a long time looking at things he wanted and taking them. He stood in the doorway of what had once been her family's dry goods store, and he looked at her with an expression that was almost amused, and that almost was the thing that made her hands go still at her sides. "Calla Redd," he said, not surprised. He had known she was coming. He had known, and he had come outside anyway, which told her exactly what kind of man he still was. "You look like the road." "I came off the road," she said. "This is private property." He gestured at the street around him with one hand, the gold ring on his finger catching the light. "All of it, more or less. The street isn't yours yet. Give it time." A thin smile. "You've got nothing here, girl. Whatever you think you've got, you don't. The title is clean, the records are filed, and every judge in this circuit has had supper at my table." He let that land. "Go back to wherever you came from." She looked at him for a long moment, at the gold ring, at the clean white shirt, at the sign above the door behind him, with her family's name replaced by his. "I'll go," she said, "when I'm done." She turned and walked into the general store without another word. Behind her, she heard him say something to the man standing in his doorway, low, quick, not for her ears. She noted it and kept walking. Inside, Eli Marsh went pale when he saw her face. "Calla," he said. "Eli." She set 2 coins on the counter. Tin of coffee, cartridges, .44 caliber, box of salt. "He's going to make trouble for you," Eli said quietly. "He already did," she said. 7 years ago. I'm here about that." He filled the order without another word. She took her supplies, nodded once, and walked back out into the heat. The man in the canvas vest was still in the doorway of the sheriff's office down the street, watching her with grey eyes. He had not moved during the exchange with Prescott. He had watched it. She could not yet read what that watching meant. She mounted and rode east. The homestead sat 3 miles out, past the creek crossing, and up the long rise her father had called the spine of the property. The roan remembered the road. Calla let her move. What she found at the top of the rise stopped her. The house still stood, grey and stripped, the porch buckled, one window boarded, the door padlocked. The barn behind it was a skeleton, 3 walls and a partial roof. The corrals were taken over by scrub. The pump was rusted at the handle. She looked at all of it from the saddle and said nothing for a long time. Her father had bought this land with 10 years of wages saved before Calla was born. Work done in conditions he never described in full, but which she understood by the way he went quiet at certain kinds of conversations. He had built the house himself, the barn himself, the corrals himself. He had worked that land for 20 years before Prescott decided he wanted it. Prescott had used paper first, forged liens, a fraudulent promissory note bearing her father's signature. By the time James Redd understood fully what was happening, the land was legally gone. The barn burning had been the final message. Her father had died 40 months after she rode away, in a rented room 40 miles from the land that had been his life. She had not been there when he died. That was the weight she carried above all others. She dismounted and walked the perimeter of the house, reading the ground. Boot prints, recent, 2 sets. A horse had been tied at the east corner. Someone was checking this property regularly. She filed that and moved on. She was examining the padlock when hoofbeats came from behind her, and she turned. The man from the sheriff's office pulled up 10 feet away, stepped down easy, and stood with one hand on his horse's neck. Up close, his grey eyes were steady, and his broken nose gave his face a useful plainness. "Caleb Dern," he said. "Sheriff, 8 months. Calla Redd," she said. "Former resident, 7 years. I know who you are." He looked at the house, then back at her. "Prescott's already sent a rider to the county seat. He's filing a trespass order today. You've got maybe 6 hours before it's official. He knew I was coming. He's had eyes on 3 roads since last week." Dern walked closer, hands easy at his sides. "I saw what happened out front. You held your ground." He paused. "That was smart, but it won't stay civil. He moved 2 hired men into town 4 days ago. They're not ranch hands." "What are they?" "The kind of men that don't leave witnesses." He said it plainly, the way a man states weather. "You need to tell me what you've got before he moves on you tonight." She looked at him for a long moment. "Why?" "Because I've been sheriff here 8 months, and the whole time I've felt the shape of something wrong in this town I couldn't name." He held her gaze. "I think you can name it." She could. She reached into her coat and held out the oilcloth packet. "Start with the land grant," she said. They sat on the porch steps of the ruined house, and she talked for 20 minutes while Dern read. The original land grant registered in 1863 in her father's name. The letter from Thomas Ault, Prescott's own former land agent, written in a hand that shook, describing the forged promissory note and the coercion behind it. The written statement from Ault's sister, Gideon Peirce, the foreman who had given the order to burn the barn, now living in Seco Flats 50 miles east. Dern read every document fully before he spoke. "This is enough," he said quietly. "If we get it to the territorial marshal before Prescott suppresses it." "How long?" "I can have a rider out tonight. Marshal Steen is 3 days east, maybe 2 if the weather holds." He looked at her. "But Prescott moves faster than the law. You know that." "I know that," she said. The trouble was not finished. It had only just arrived. She took a room at the Hargrove boarding house that night and lay on the bed without removing her boots, listening to the alley. Mrs. Hargrove, 60, sharp-eyed and wise enough not to ask questions, had given her the corner room with 2 exits. An hour before midnight, the window at the far end of the alley lit orange. Not lantern orange. Fire orange. Calla was down the stairs and out the back door in 10 seconds. The feed store 2 buildings east was burning, a building Prescott did not own, which told her this was a message, not an accident. A crowd was gathering. In the middle of that crowd, she could see one of the hired men, heavy set, watching her window rather than the fire. She crossed to the shadow of the opposite wall and moved along it, putting buildings between herself and the man watching. But he had seen her. He came across the street at an angle, cutting her off before she reached the alley corner. A second figure appeared from the other direction. She was between them with nowhere to go except back through the firelight, which would make her visible to everyone. "Prescott wants the papers," the heavy one said. He was close enough that she could smell tobacco and leather. "Hand them over and you ride out tonight. Simple. And if I don't, then it gets less simple." She said nothing. Her hand was on the brass buckle of her father's belt, 2 inches from the revolver at her hip. Then Caleb Dern's voice came from the darkness to her left. "Drop it." The heavy man turned. Dern had come out of the alley shadow with his rifle up and his badge catching the firelight. "Official business," Dern said. "Both of you step back from her and put your hands where I can see them." The second man moved wrong, a half step forward, hand going toward his coat. Dern brought the rifle stock across his forearm with a clean, practiced motion, and the man went down on one knee with a cry. "I said step back." They stepped back. Dern marched them to the jail, while Calla held his rifle. They walked in silence, except for the crackle of the fire behind them and the voices of the crowd. At the jailhouse door, Dern turned to her. "The oilcloth," he said quietly. "Give it to me. I'll lock it in the floor safe tonight." She looked at him, at the broken nose and the steady eyes, and the way he had appeared out of a dark alley at exactly the right moment, with no fanfare and no hesitation. She handed him the packet. He locked his 2 prisoners and the documents, and then he turned and sat on the edge of his desk and looked at the floor for a moment. "He'll send more," he said. "I know. I've got 1 deputy. If Prescott decides to push past legal channels tonight, then we hold until morning," she said. He looked up at her. Something shifted in his face. Not softness, but recognition. The kind that passes between 2 people who have each been carrying something alone for a long time and have just realized they are carrying it in the same direction. "There's a back room," he said. "It locks from the inside. It's not comfortable." "I've slept in worse," she said. She had, but she did not sleep that night. She sat in the locked room with her revolver on her knee and listened to the town settle into silence, and thought about her father, standing on that porch in the early morning with his tin cup, looking out over the rise with a satisfaction so quiet and complete. She had not understood it as a child. She understood it now, and she intended to be standing on that porch again, before this was over. Morning came without further movement from Prescott's men. Dern's rider had left before dawn. They had 2 days, maybe 3. Prescott spent those days doing what he always did, using paper. He filed the trespass order. He sent a letter to the circuit judge. He appeared at the sheriff's office on the second morning, in his clean wool coat and his cold, pale eyes, and told Dern directly that the documents held in his safe were obtained illegally, and he expected them returned before sundown. Dern listened to all of it, without moving from behind his desk. "File a motion," he said, when Prescott finished. Prescott's jaw tightened. That was the first crack she had seen in him. "You understand," he said quietly, "that there are ways this gets worse for you." "I expect there are," Dern said. "File a motion." Prescott looked then at Calla, who was sitting against the far wall, and the look was something specific and cold. Not surprise, not defeat, but a recalibration. A man deciding he needed to change his approach. She had seen that look before. It meant the real move was still coming. It came that afternoon. Dern's deputy, a young man named Harker, 6 months in the post, came in at 4 o'clock with a bruised jaw and his hands shaking. 2 of Prescott's men had stopped him on the road outside town and relieved him of his sidearm and told him to pass a message. The message was that if the documents were not delivered to the Prescott office by nightfall, Caleb Dern would be found to have accepted payment from a known fraudster and his badge would be pulled by week's end. Dern looked at Harker for a long moment. "Go home," he said. "Lock your door." After Harker left, Dern sat very still at his desk. She could see him working through it. The weight of a badge that could be pulled, a reputation that could be burned, a life he had built here over 8 months that Prescott could dismantle with a single letter to the county board. "He can do it," Dern said quietly. Not to her, just saying it plainly, the way you name a real thing before you decide what to do about it. "He can try," she said. Dern looked at her. Then he stood, took his hat off the rack, and put it on. "Come with me," he said. The ride back from Seco Flats was cold. A front had moved in off the high country while they were in the livery with Perce, and by the time they crossed the last creek before Hallow's Bend, the wind had teeth. Calla rode with her coat pulled close and her eyes on the road ahead, not speaking. Dern rode alongside her and did not try to fill the silence, which she appreciated. At the edge of town, he said, "Prescott will know by morning." "Someone in that livery will tell him," she agreed, "which means tonight is the window, before Steen arrives and Prescott has to play it legally." He looked at her. "I want you inside the jailhouse tonight, not the boarding house. And if he sends men again, then at least they have to come through a building with bars on the windows." She considered. "Perce. He's not safe in Seco Flats once Prescott hears he talked." Dern nodded slowly. He had already thought of this. "I'll send Harker back tonight to bring him in. He can stay in the second cell. Protective custody." "Will Harker go?" "He'll go," Dern said, though something in his tone said he was not entirely certain. They rode in. The town was quieter than it should have been for that hour, a particular kind of quiet that Calla recognized from 7 years of moving through places where trouble had already made its arrangements and was waiting for the right moment. She kept her hand near her belt and her eyes moving. Nothing came that night, but in the morning she woke on the cot in the back room to the sound of voices outside, too many voices for early morning, and when she came out into the office, Dern was standing in the doorway looking down the street. 3 men on horseback, not the same 2 from the alley, different men, better dressed, one of them wearing a county official's badge that Calla did not recognize. "County land agent," Dern said without turning around. "Prescott's bringing a counterfiling. He's claiming the original 1863 grant was invalidated by a federal land review in 1871. "Was it?" "No." He finally turned. "But it'll take time to prove it wasn't. And time is what he's buying." He looked at her steadily. "He doesn't need to win in court. He just needs to delay." She stood in the doorway beside him and looked at the 3 horsemen and at Prescott, who had come out of his office and was speaking to the land agent with his gold ring catching the early light and his clean shirt still white as a declaration. He glanced across at her, just once. Then he smiled and turned back to the land agent. That smile. She had been carrying that smile for 7 years, the one from the night his men came, and her father had stood on the porch, and Prescott had watched from his horse and done nothing to stop it, and smiled exactly that way, as if the whole thing were a transaction that had simply completed itself, as if her father were not a man who had built every board of that house with his own hands, as if it did not matter who a person was or what they had made or what they had earned, only what documents said. She stepped back inside. "What do we need to stop the delay?" she said. Dern came inside and shut the door. "The alt letter is strong. Perce's testimony is strong. But if Prescott can create enough procedural noise in the county court, Steen can't override a county filing without a federal order. He'd need cause." "The barn burning," she said. "That's federal cause. Destruction of property under coercion." Dern looked at her. "Arson on homestead land filed under a federal grant," she said. "That's not a county matter. That goes straight to the territorial court." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Perce named the men who lit it. He named the date. He named Prescott's instruction. In a signed statement. In a signed statement. She could see him moving through it, the legal architecture of it, the way the arson charge cut underneath Prescott's county-level maneuvering and put the whole matter on a different table entirely. "I need to write to Steen," he said. He was already moving to the desk. "Write fast," she said. "The land agent is still out there." He wrote the letter in 12 minutes. Calla read it over his shoulder. It was precise and spare, and it named the arson and cited Percy's testimony and asked for a federal hold on all county filings related to the Red Land Grant, pending territorial review. Dern signed it, sealed it, and had his fastest horse saddled in 15 minutes. The rider was gone before the land agent had finished his conversation with Prescott. She watched the rider go from the jailhouse window, the horse finding its stride as it cleared the edge of town and hit the open road, and she thought about her father writing letters in the last years. Letters to land offices, letters to county clerks, letters to men who read them and did nothing. Letters sent into silence. She thought about how different it was to send a letter when the man sealing it had a badge and a signed testimony and a federal cause, and how much of the difference between justice and the absence of it was simply the presence of someone with standing to make noise in the right room. Her father had had no one like that. She had Dern. The thought settled in her in a way she had not expected, and she let it sit for a moment without examining it too closely, the way you leave a fire alone when it is just catching. They rode to Seco Flats that evening, hard and fast, arriving after dark. Gideon Perce was not a large man. He was thin and grey-faced, and he was sitting in the back of a lamp-lit livery stable when they found him. And when he saw Calla, his face changed in a way that was not quite guilt and not quite relief, but had elements of both. She had planned to be careful and measured in this conversation. She had planned to lay out the documents and let the evidence do the work. She sat down across from him and said, "You owned my father's barn. He died 14 months later in a rented room with nothing. Tell me everything you know about the note." Gideon Perce looked at her for a long moment. Then he put his face in his hands. He talked for 2 hours about the promissory note and the afternoon Prescott had stood behind James Redd with 2 men at the door while Redd's hand was guided to the signature line, about the threats that had followed, about the barn and who had lit the first torch. He named 4 men. He named dates. He had kept all of it in his chest for 7 years, like a stone he had been unable to put down. Dern wrote everything in a notebook. When Perce was finished, Dern looked at him and said, "You'll put that in writing and sign it." "It'll cost me," Perce said. "It already did," Calla said. 7 years ago, you just didn't pay the right person." He signed it before midnight. Steen's federal hold arrived 2 days before the county court was scheduled to hear Prescott's counterfiling. It arrived by wire, a terse, authoritative document that froze all proceedings relating to the Red Land Grant pending territorial review. The county clerk, who had spent a week accommodating Prescott's paperwork, spent a morning being very careful not to make eye contact with anyone. Prescott spent 1 full day attempting to find a way around the federal hold. His lawyer came and went twice. The circuit judge's name was spoken aloud in 3 conversations that Calla was not in, but heard described afterward. None of it moved. A federal hold is a wall with no door. Marshal Aldous Steen arrived in Hallow's Bend on the 3rd morning. He was compact and weathered, and he read the out letter in 4 minutes and said nothing for a full 60 seconds. Then he said, "Get Prescott." What followed was not the confrontation Calla had imagined in the early years. Not a public reckoning in the street. Not a moment of visible collapse. It was a room, 4 people, a table of documents, and the sound of a man running out of angles. Prescott tried dismissal. He tried legal procedure. He said the circuit judge's name twice. Near the end, he tried something shaped like an offer. Partial restoration, compensation, a quiet resolution that would spare everyone the cost of a formal proceeding. Marshal Steen was not interested in any of it, but she was. "I don't want compensation," Calla said. It was the first time she had spoken directly to Prescott since the street on the first day. He turned to look at her, and she held his pale eyes without blinking. "I want the title, clean, and I want Gideon Percy's testimony entered into the territorial court record, with your name attached to every item in it. Not a quiet resolution, a documented one." Prescott looked at her for a long moment. The gold ring caught the light. His clean white shirt had a crease in it for the first time. "You understand what you're asking," he said. "I understand exactly what I'm asking," she said. Steen set his pen down on the table. "Mr. Prescott," he said, "you can agree to the title transfer and the formal record, or you can take your chances with the appellate process, and I will ensure that every document on this table is entered into the Federal Archive with your name on the cover page." A pause. "The choice is yours, but I'd make it now." The room was very quiet. Prescott looked at his hands, at the gold ring. Then he looked at the window, at the street outside, at the town he had owned for 15 years. He signed. The title transfer was filed at the county seat 11 days later. The formal record was entered. Prescott's legal challenges lasted 4 months and cost him considerably, and resolved in the territorial court's favor on every count. Dern's badge was pulled for 6 days by the county board at Prescott's instigation. He sat those 6 days out and said little about it. On the 7th day, Marshal Stein's written endorsement arrived at the county offices, and the badge was returned with a formal apology that no one expected Dern to accept warmly, and he did not. There was a stiffness in him after that had not been there before, a careful quality, like a man who has learned that the ground beneath an institution he trusted has some give in it. He wore it quietly, the way he wore most things. She noticed. She did not say anything about it for a long time. On the first morning of the 5th week, she was back on the homestead, pulling rotted boards off the porch. She had been at it since first light. The roan was in the corral, new posts, her work, 2 weeks of evenings after everything else. The pump was replaced. The east window was unboarded and open to the air. The barn was still a skeleton and would be for some time yet, but she had cleared the floor and stacked the good timber. Caleb Dern rode up the rise late in the afternoon and dismounted at the corral. He looked at the new posts for a moment without saying anything. "County recorder confirmed the filing this morning," he said. "I know. Steen sent word." He walked to the porch and looked at the boards she had pulled and the new ones stacked beside them. "You're doing this yourself," he said. "My father built this himself," she said. "Seems right." He was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the cottonwoods down at the creek. "I owe you something," he said. She stopped working and looked at him. He was looking at the creek, not at her. "For the 6 days," she said. "I knew what I was taking on when I sent that rider to Steen. I knew Prescott would come at the badge." He paused. "I'm not saying I'd have done differently. I'm saying it cost something I didn't expect it to cost. And that made me understand something about your father I hadn't understood before." She looked at him for a long time, at the broken nose and the steady eyes and the badge back on the canvas vest, sitting slightly different now than it had before. "He worked this land 20 years and lost it to a signature on a page," she said. "You lost your badge for 6 days and got it back. The cost is different. It is, he said. I'm not comparing them. I'm saying I understand the shape of it now in a way I didn't before. And that's your doing. The sun was dropping toward the ridgeline. The red soil of the rise held the light longer than anything else, the way it always had. She picked up the next board. You want to help with this porch? She said. I've got a spare hammer. He took his coat off and hung it on the corral post and picked up the hammer. They worked until the light went. He did not stay after dark, and she did not ask him to. But before he rode down the rise, he stopped and looked back at the house, at the lit window, at the smoke beginning to rise from the stove, at the roan settled in the new corral. And he held that image for a moment, the way a man holds something he does not yet have a word for. Then he rode back toward town. Inside the house, Calla set the coffee pot on the stove and stood at the window looking out over the rise. Below her, the land lay red and dry and overgrown and entirely hers, her father's 20 years in the soil of it, her own 7 years in the fighting for it, and all the seasons of work still ahead. The roan lifted her head toward the creek and held still, listening to something in the dark that only she could hear. Calla watched her for a moment. Then she turned back to the stove, and the coffee, and the work of tomorrow. The dust settles. The danger has passed. But every story leaves something behind. A feeling, a question, a memory. What did this one leave with you? Tell me in the comments. Tell me where you are in this world tonight, because these stories travel far, and I want to know every corner they reach. If you felt something, like this video, share it with someone who loves a good story, and subscribe, because the next tale is already waiting in the shadows. I'll see you there.